Welcome everyone on Zoom and on Facebook to our Thursday webinar. Before I introduce our mystery speaker, not so mystery, let me go ahead and go through some of our usual slides. We always start with our land acknowledgement. Crow Canyon acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands this institution sits. Our mission-related work is not at all possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future, and we respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. We are so grateful to all Indigenous people, and we support the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. Thank you to all of our partners. We are coming up on our 40th anniversary conference and celebration. You have been hearing us talk about our 40 years, our 40-year anniversary all year now. Our new book, edited by Dr. Susan Ryan, has just been released. So check out our website and check out, you can purchase us on Amazon, which is kind of amazing. And we will be sharing more about this volume and about our conference as we get close to October. Thank you to all of you. We are entirely, our webinar series is entirely donation supported. We are so grateful to you to help us continue to provide for our public and our speakers. And Ben, you are a particularly high earner on this one. Many people making donations to today's webinar, so thank you, all of you. As we always tell you, try to pop your questions in the Q&A instead of the chat so they don't get lost. You can put them in at any time. We are live streaming on Facebook, and this lecture will be available on YouTube after we're done. Some amazing webinars coming up next week, being Fremont in the Uinta Basin, a social examination through rock imagery with Elizabeth Hora. We will also, at the same time, some of you have signed up for our travel program next week. We will all be in Utah looking at Fremont and Ute rock art. Very excited about that. And the week after that, we have the Salado phenomenon in the Phoenix Basin, current research on ceramic composition and vessel shapes with Caitlin Wishloss. And we are really excited for that webinar as well. So please keep joining us. Without further ado, I'm really excited to have our friend and recent employee and always partner, Dr. Ben Bellorado. I think his co-presenter, Tom Windes, is hopefully will be coming, maybe having a few technical difficulties. Now, I know that Ben needs no introduction, and he is rivaling this. He's in our top 3 of the highest number of viewers and registrants, just so we can make him a little nervous before he gets going. But I know everybody probably knows Ben pretty well. I'm just going to pick a few fun facts from his bio, like that he was born and raised in Jackson, Wyoming. If everyone doesn't know that Ben's a Wyoming guy. He did his bachelor's degree at Fort Lewis here in Southwest Colorado. He got his master's at NAU and his PhD from University of Arizona, where he has now returned to take his new position as assistant curator of Southwestern archaeology. And you know, Ben has so many awesome things to say. I'm not going to read your entire extensive bio, but I think you really do need no introduction. So thank you so much, Ben. I am gonna stop sharing so that you can jump in and start your talk.
Great. Let's see here. So share screen. Please let me know. Can you see that, Liz? Does it look like the presenter mode?
Yep, perfect.
All
Looks
right,
beautiful.
great. So let's get that over. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. I'm really excited to be speaking with you from Tucson, Arizona, where I just started this new position at Arizona State Museum just earlier this week. And it's going great. I do miss all of you up in Southwest Colorado and the Four Corners, and especially Crow Canyon. So please tell each other I said hello. But yeah, so I'm really pleased to be presenting basically a summary of our chapter in the 40th anniversary volume that my good friend and colleague Tom Windes and I put together. So I'll go ahead and start here. So of course, as Liz discussed, and I think there's going to be some overlap, but I think it's really important to start all of our presentations in archaeology in the Southwest in particular with land acknowledgement. And the places I'm going to be talking about today are from the traditional homelands of many clans and groups ancestral to the Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma Laguna, and numerous Rio Grande River Pueblos, as well as clans of the Dene and or Navajo and Apache, and then bands of the Ute and Paiute peoples. And we're really grateful for Indigenous people who continue to maintain their relationships with these and other ancestral places, who fight for the protection and to work towards preserving, protecting cultural traditions for the long term. Now, the sites that we investigated for this research and that we're discussing today are some of the most spectacular and significant in the region, and it might be a little biased, but they are really just incredible. But they're also some of the most fragile and threatened places in the Bears Ears and throughout the larger Four Corners. So, please visit these places with respect and help us protect our nation's cultural heritage for the long future, for the long durée. These places really are very fragile, and we need to do our best to try to protect them. So jump right into it. So in our chapter, in this beautiful volume, you can see on the lower right here, the cover of it, really covers 40 years of incredible research by Crow Canyon, and it was compiled, basically corralled and prodded, herded cats by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Susan Ryan. And we're just so excited about the volume. Tom Windes is my co-author on this, and he and I put this chapter together based on really, I think, gosh, Tom's been out there longer than I have, so probably like 25, maybe at least 20 years of southeastern Utah, and then looking at the larger region. So in our chapter, we review previous discussions of the depopulation. Do you hear me still?
We lost you for a sec there, Ben.
Oh, okay. Where was
you? You were just introducing Tom Windes, and yeah, you'll have to reshare. Do you have a little unstable internet going on down there?
I thought we had a great internet. It didn't say I'm unstable, but it didn't say my internet was.
Okay, you're up and running again. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Tom and I have been working out in southeastern Utah for at least 20 years. It's a real privilege to work in this area. It's just incredibly beautiful. And so our chapter really kind of summarizes a component of this, looking at the depopulation. So in our chapter, we review previous discussions of the depopulation in the northern Southwest. We summarize prior dendrochronological or tree ring assessments of the timing of the depopulation, both of the northern San Juan region and then the larger San Juan River Basin. But we really focus on a perspective from the Cedar Mesa area, where there are new data is coming from. And with this data, we provide a synthesis of new tree ring samples and analyses from over 20 previously unrecorded, 2 dozen unrecorded cliff dwellings in the Cedar Mesa area. And our goal is to really reassess the nature of the timing of the depopulation, both locally in the Cedar Mesa area and in the larger region. So where is Cedar Mesa, if you don't know? Well, so Cedar Mesa is also known as the southern part of the Bears Ears National Monument. It also includes Natural Bridges National Monument. And you can see on the left here, here's the Four Corners. And these kind of amorphous shapes are some of the archaeological cultures, as archaeologists have defined them in the past. And Right here, you can see on the left, the Central Mesa Verde area is where Crow Canyon is and where Mesa Verde National Park is. And over to the western side where it says Western Mesa Verde area, that dark shape there, that's Cedar Mesa. And so blown up here, you can see Cedar Mesa with all these different canyons and drainages bounded on the east side by Ridge and Cottonwood Wash, on the left side, or the west side by Grand Gulch and the Glen Canyon area. On the north, of course, the Bears Ears and Elk Ridge, and then on the south by the San Juan River. That's one way that we talk about this. Now, on the right, you can see a map of the Bears Ears National Monument as it was in the original designation in 2016, the reduction in 2017, and then more recently, the Biden administration, excuse me, has reestablished the boundaries to pretty much almost exactly the extent of the original boundaries, with some slight variations. And so the greater Cedar Mesa area that we really have focused on with our research is in the southern portion of that. So you can see that relative to these various designations here. Now, I always like to start by saying, these resources are in danger. And so, the murals I'll be talking about, weaving, the sites that we're talking about are much more common in the Bears Ears and other parts of the region. There is an increased threat from amplified visitation, from historic and recent looting, and there's a very real need to document these resources before they're lost forever. So this is the reason why many of us in southeastern Utah are in great support of increased federal protections for the area with the original boundaries. And there's just a few examples here of some vandalism of sites, looting and such, that we've documented out there. And this is stuff that hasn't just happened in the past. It's happened in the very recent past. And then unfortunately, some instances are still occurring to this day. When we started our work, or at least my component of my work out there, I was working with a BLM archaeologist named Don Simonis, and he said, we need to know why these sites are important and where they are, or we can't protect them. And so that's been really our mandate, in part, to document these sites before they're impacted further and to try to understand why they're important and worth saving for all sorts of reasons. So our research really focuses on the often overlooked but incredibly important perishable wood resources used at sites, which often are overlooked. Not a lot of people pay attention to that, even other than, oh, that's really interesting, let's document the structure and the components of it. They don't really focus on the wood. And so there's this incredible resource out there that really hardly anybody's looked at. And that's some of the work we'll be talking about this evening. So dendroarchaeological studies, really it's dendro is tree rings or tree studies, and then the archaeological component of that. These studies provide really important insights into the dating of construction and remodeling of structures and sites, and they really provide us one of the clearest lines of evidence to look at population stability and movement available to Southwestern archaeologists. We're really the envy of archaeology around the world because we have these incredible preservation conditions in the Southwest, and because we have such a really tight grasp on chronology that you really can't get anywhere else in the world. So before I jump in that the work we've done, I just want to talk a little bit about tree ring dating and how tree ring dating works, because I don't know exactly what our audience is familiar with here. So I'm going to give a really oversimplified explanation of this. So tree ring dating really was developed actually right here at the University of Arizona, where A.E. Douglas, Andrew Ellicott Douglas, back in the early 1900s, worked with Emil Howry to basically develop this method of using the growth rings of trees to cross-date archaeological sites and then create climate reconstructions and everything like that. So basically, this has been occurring in the Southwest for, gosh, over 100 years now. And so scientists and archaeologists have gone out across the region and taken samples of intact wood from both archaeological sites and then also live trees from all over forests and mountains in the region, and created these master chronologies built of hundreds, if not thousands of samples. And so what Tom and I have done is basically implemented a program where we go to archaeological sites and do baseline documentation to help, like I said, understand why these sites are important, document what's there before it's impacted further, and then we take some tree ring samples. So basically what one can do to create these master chronologies that allow us to do this cross dating is someone could go out to a live tree, say up on a mountain slope, and they take a core sample out of that. It doesn't really hurt the tree recovers. But basically this is built on the assumption that most trees grow an annual ring every year. So they put on one ring. Now, the relative thickness of that ring is determined by precipitation and temperature for the most part. There's some other factors. And so really narrow rings are the result of a dry or cold year. And then big wide rings are the result of a wet or warm year. Usually it's the precipitation pattern is what we're really locking into in the Southwest. And so you can see this live tree at the top has this varying pattern of thick and thin lines. And then we have this core. So the outsides of the sample is this year, 2023. And then we can count backwards to the center of where that tree grew at the pith and understand the climate regime that particular tree went through. Well, then we can go to, say, a dead tree, maybe right next door to that live tree that died, a while ago, and we can take a core out of that tree. And that has basically that tree died a while ago, so it doesn't have its outer ring is a few years old. And then we can count back, and often those trees will have started to grow earlier. These rings aren't usually blue and purple and green color coded, but for the sake of this discussion, it really is helpful. And basically we can look at those overlapping sequences of climate indicators in the rings and start pushing these chronologies back further in time. Then we can go to, say, a historic house, maybe a log cabin, and take some samples out of there, and go to older and older structures. And eventually we might go to, say, an ancient, an ancestral Pueblo cliff dwelling, and we can take some samples out of some of those beams where appropriate, and we can push these chronologies back further and further and further. Now, like I said, this has been happening in the Southwest for over 100 years, and so we have these major, really large master chronologies that go back quite a while. In the Four Corners, the oldest goes back to, I think, to 212 BC in the Durango area. The model we look at in the Natural Bridges chronology, or in southeastern Utah, goes back to 97 AD. So basically, we can lock into these master chronologies and go to these sites, take samples, and then basically they slot into these master chronologies for the larger region, and we can then date when structures were built or remodeled. Now, you can see Tom and I both taking samples here. Tom taught me everything I know about field sampling. He's truly one of the gurus and has developed some most innovative and important methods for doing this. And you can see we both have this kind of crazed look in our eye. Now, people that know us might say we both are a little crazed, but in this case, it's because this is actually really hard work. It actually takes a lot of concentration and upper body strength and just focus. And so that's why we see somebody taking a tree ring sample, they usually have these kind of intense looks in their eye. And so basically that's how we lock into this. So now I'll just go ahead and jump into the research that we've done. So until now, research focused on the depopulation processes in the northern San Juan drainage has largely been dependent on the compilation of large tree ring data sets recovered from sites across the region, as I just discussed. And researchers at Crow Canyon have really been instrumental in the generation and the compilation of these data sets over the years, particularly starting with Mark Varian's 1999 dissertation on the Northern San Juan River region. And then more recently, a guy named Steve Nash, who's a dendrochronologist, basically updated and revised and kind of augmented this data set with new information for the Village Ecodynamics Project, which is a project focus at Crow Canyon. And then more recently, Mark Varian actually reassessed all that data in 2010 in the book called Leaving Mesa Verde, which if you don't have it in your archaeologist, you really should try to lock into that. And so Mark's 2010 summary combined these prior data sets and focused on creating a really large data set of the latest sites in the Northern San Juan that contained at least 10 or more cutting dates. Now, he defined or identified the latest streaming dates from the Northern San Juan region as the last date is 1281 so far, and that's from a site at Springhouse in the Mesa Verde National Park. And this suggests that the depopulation of the region was really almost complete by the late 1280s. Now, in nearby Saggy Canyon here, you can see in the over here on the lower left of this slide, a guy named Jeff Dean, who works at the tree ring lab, really foundational to laboratory tree ring research. When he did his dissertation work in the late 1960s, he worked in Saggy Canyon and found that the cliff dwellings there, including Keat Seal, Batatican, some of those well-known places, actually date slightly later than we have in the Northern San Juan, and that the depopulation, or basically when everybody left from this area, was probably complete by about 1286 or so. That's the last date, I should say. So probably about 15 or 20 years after that. And so these sites probably were depopulated and ceased to be occupied by about 1290 or 1300. And prior research in the Cedar Mesa area proposed that probably a slightly earlier date, several decades earlier, probably about 1250, the depopulation of the Cedar Mesa area had been completed. And so most of the, if not all, the Ancestral Pueblo folks there had moved to other places. There's more animations I was looking for. So most prior treating assessments in the Ancestral Pueblo sites in the Cedar Mesa area were collected by the Cedar Mesa Project, which was run by Dr. Bill Leip and Dr. R.G. Matson back in the 1970s and 1980s. And they conducted extensive surveys, limited text excavations, and some tree ring sampling efforts in several large study units, mostly on the drainages, on the western side of Cedar Mesa here. So you can see Bullet Canyon, Johns Canyon, parts of Grand Gulch, Upper Grand Gulch, and then a little bit over here in North Road Canyon on the eastern side of Cedar Mesa, but primarily their focus was on the western side. Now, based on these data, Matson and his colleagues found that the populations began to move from the mesa tops to the canyon's floor settings by basically about 1150 to 1200. So people have been living on the mesa tops prior to that for several hundred years, and then moved down into the canyons between 1150 and 1200. And this is similar to patterns that we've seen in the Central Mesa Verde area or in southwestern Colorado. Now, most of these new settlements were built in alcoves and along canyon shelves, and especially in canyon bottoms. And they're usually near reliable springs, and where there's some relatively easy access to both the canyon bottom and mesa tops. And the mesa tops is where we think that most of at least the maize agriculture was being conducted. Although, of course, probably in people's gardens or little pots, stretches of arable land in the bottom of canyons, they probably did some additional gardening. So Varian's analysis in 2010, the last dates of the occupation of the Cedar Mesa area included only a few sites. So based on prior data, he found that there really only were 4 tree ring dated sites that yield 10 or more cutting dates at or after 1260 in the area, including the well-dated Moon House complex, which is over here in the lower right. Moon House previously had yielded the latest tree ring date for the Cedar Mesa area and really for southwestern Colorado at 1268. And this indicated to Matson and his colleagues that the entire region, or at least southeastern Utah, was depopulated probably by the early 1270s, and probably earlier than that. And it was just really a holdout population. So 6 additional sites with 1250s dates were identified in the area. And what Matson and Life had done is compile all the tree ring dates for the entire area, and found that there were many sites that dated to the 1240s and earlier. And so this diminishing number of dates, 1250 and after, suggested to them that the area was pretty much depopulated in the 1250s and 1260s. Now, and I should say that their suggestion is that Moon House, because it had just a few really late dates, was probably a holdout population, and that the region was probably pretty much devoid of people, that there was just a few sites in certain places that had a really small holdout occupation into the 1270s. And that folks then moved over to join people in the Central Mesa Verde area to the east. So to this landscape of previous studies is where we really come in. So in the early 2000s, Tom Windes started the Cedar Mesa Wood Project, first starting in Natural Bridges National Monument and then expanding into the Cedar Mesa area. And Tom's methods included going to sites, particularly flood dwellings, to document them, creating condition assessments and baseline archaeological documentation of sites and structures. Did a lot of mapping, particularly with the old school alidade. You can see on the lower right here. He and his team of what we call wood rats, they call themselves, are really, really adept at using some of these older technologies to create these incredible documentation of these sites. Now, in a lot of these alcoves and cliff dwellings, you can't get GPSs in them, and it's often difficult to get a total station. So some of these older technologies are really tried and true and really unbeatable in those situations. For Tom's work, he's really focused on the wood in particular. And so he documents every single piece of wood at these sites. And so you can see him sitting in the structure here on the left. And every single one of those pieces of wood, he will map and draw and look at the surfaces and characterize the species, any ancient or modern damage or alteration to the samples, and then in select cases, he'll take tree ring samples from those beams. He also does feature descriptions, in-field artifact tallies, and really an extensive amount of work to document these sites. The second project is my project, the Cedar Mesa Building Murals project that I started in 2013. That really built on many of the same methodologies, but I was really focused on documenting building decorations in structures that could be dated. So, for example, you can see at the lower left here, this is an inscribed mural of showing several sandals in the side of a tall wall, which I'll talk more about in a bit. And then over here on the right, you can see we're inside of my volunteer, Aaron O'Brien, and I are inside of a structure on the side of a cliff that has this painted decoration on the inside. And so here we're mapping the inside of that structure to document those both the mural decorations and the situation of the wood. At a few a few sites, we conducted photogrammetry. Basically is a 3D modeling method, really low cost compared to things like LiDAR, but you can create 3D reconstructions of some of these sites that really help with preservation and conservation efforts. And the goal of this project was to create a seriation of mural styles. Now, like I said, both of these projects really interdigitate, and Tom would volunteer for me and I would volunteer for him. And we both had great support from quite a few volunteers. I had over 45 volunteers on my project. Tom, who started this project in the early 2000s, has had even more volunteers. And these are folks that donate their time and their efforts and their energies to come out to the middle of Utah, usually in the heat of the summer, and help us document these places. And we're documenting these at-risk sites. And there's incredible preservation in this part of the country, and because of the arid conditions, we have intact wooden resources, obviously other types of things, but these sites, like I said, are in danger of being impacted. So almost every single site we went to showed evidence of either collectors' piles or looting or vandalism. And so we really want to establish this baseline documentation before these sites change further. And so you can see Tom and I working with some of our volunteers in some of these just incredibly picturesque settings to create maps kind of like this one here on the lower left. This is the intact wooden superstructure of a particular kiva. So as an example of some of this, we're not just documenting sites that have never been documented, we're also revisiting sites that were been documented back in the early days. This is an example from a site over on the eastern side of Cedar Mesa. And on the left here, you can see this is the map that was drawn in 1978. And all I can say is that our methods have advanced and changed quite a bit since then. You can see this drawing looks like it was made with pen. This is kind of daisy chains for walls. This is the map they drew. It's somewhat useful, but also not as useful as we would hope, let's just say. So this is the site today. You can see it on the right here. It actually has these 3 tiers of architecture. And if you were to try to get any information on, say, population or settlement size, accretional building up of the site itself, it'd be very difficult based on this map. So this is one site we revisited, and you can see here on the lower left. Oops, sorry. This second story, the second tier here of rooms is what I have shown with our map here that we redrew. And so you can see much more detail, which they show like the thickness of the walls in various places, various features like wall pegs or vent shafts. And then we really painstakingly map in where every single piece of wood is at the site. So when we eventually say, if we were to take tree ring samples, which we did in this case, we would know exactly where those beams came from, so we can understand the relative position of where they were in the construction of the site. So this particular site in the Bears Ears actually returned one of the new latest dates of 1267, which is a cutting date, it's plus B, and then, or sorry, a near cutting date, and then a non-cutting date of 1268 plus V. So basically that means that these beams were cut either right at 1267 or 1268 or very soon afterwards. And so you can see some of the process here. Here's just a couple other examples of some of the maps that we drew for this project. So on the left, you can see this is a plan view or cross section of an intact kiva here, and we can see the architecture and the masonry, but then the relative position of right here, these are the beams in this cribbed roof. And we don't sample every single beam, but it's really important that we map them in place so we know exactly when we do take samples where those lined up in the trajectory of the construction or remodel of the structure. And then on the right here, you can see one of the roof maps that we did showing the sequential layers of roof cribbing in this particular kiva. So on the top, we have this rather semicircular structure with these 4 big pilasters. And then we have each additional layer of beams drawn in there. And these maps each take probably about 20 hours for at least 1 or 2 people to create. And then we have to digitize them. So it's a whole lot of work here for every single site and structure that we go to. And then when we do take tree samples, the process that we took that we followed basically follows projects throughout the region. Where basically, once we take the samples, we bring them back to the laboratory tree ring research, and this is really the main tree ring lab in the world, particularly in the US. And so we submit our samples, and then so I was at the time a doctoral candidate and grad student working in both the School of Anthropology and the tree ring lab. And so I actually did all these analyses myself, at least for my project. And then Tom submitted his through the normal processes. So what we do is basically take those samples. What we ended up doing is you sand off about half of the samples. You can see a really good cross section of that beam and of the core, as you can see in the center picture here. And then we'll start doing skeleton plotting, which is really the old school method that Douglas developed back in the early 1920s. It is really one of the tried and true ways that people still do dates now. We also did ring measuring, which is more sophisticated and nuanced and modern way of cross-dating samples. So basically then we'd take and we'd cross-date these plots. All of our data was checked by the laboratory tree research technicians and staff. And then our samples were archived at the tree ring lab. So here's another example. This is a site map that we created of one particular site. And one way that we can verify that our dates are correct is through our in-field artifact tallies. So here we, this particular site, and is whenever we could, we do in-field artifact tallies. So we document the types of pottery sherds, for example, in this picture. And you can see on this site, there's some really good examples of Mesa Verde black on white bowl rims here in all four of these photos here. Even some of them have these kind of flared rims and the cross hatching or diagonal hatching that suggests that these are really late in the Mesa Verde sequence. And then we also have a really large Mesa Verde corrugated jar. And our volunteer here, Wyatt, is helping us document these tallies. One way we can then use these data is import them into a program that Scott Ortman, one of my predecessors at Crow Canyon, developed to do some Bayesian modeling of these in-field artifact tallies. And this is really a slick set of basically you can enter the types of pottery and the number of instances of each example that you have, and it'll generate these probabilities and tell you when your site likely dates to. So in this particular example, this map I just showed you from the site, it looks like the probable occupation peaked around 1225 and then continued into the late 1260s. And so when we compare that with when we actually have the tree ring dates, the tree ring dates turned out to, on this particular site, most of them came from the early to mid 1240s and then into the 1260s, we can see that those overlap pretty darn closely. So that is a way that we verify that our tree ring data is accurate, more than just the dates being exactly what they are, that it was actually, they were incorporated into structures at the same time. It also tells you roughly how many habitations you probably had, so how many people were living at the site. And in this particular instance, it suggested that there were 2 households living at the site at that particular time. And sure enough, when we look at the map, we actually have these 2, structure 2 and structure 1 are these habitation structures, kivas and such. So we were able to confirm that definitely was the case. And whenever possible, we do this on a larger scale. So basically what this tells us is that it allows us to compile this data to look at when the region was actually depopulated. So if on the right here, you can see the previously dated sites. Like I said, there's 6 sites that we knew about that had construction in the 1250s, and then 4 in the 1260s. Well, when we actually reassessed based on our new data, both Tom and my data combined, we actually have 34 sites, 18 with construction in the 1250s and 16 in the 1260s, and really changes the way we see this landscape. So you can see just the dots on the map from the left to the right, how many more there are. And these are just the sites that we visited. There's many, many more cliff dwellings in the area. But these are just the sites that we had the opportunity to work at. So at the bottom, we see the previous latest sites, latest dates from these sites. Were 1268 plus B, 1267 plus BB, and 1267 GB, which is the cutting date. But our new latest dates from 3 different sites really confirm that. And so instead of just Moon House and a couple other sites that had looked like they were occupied into the late 1260s, we actually have 3 additional sites that are now contemporaneous with that. And then several others that look like they were built and occupied within a couple of years of that same time period. And so this really changes the view of what we have, what we think was the occupation of the Cedar Mesa area in the post-1250 period. So based on our sample of habitation sites, we estimate that the size of the late occupation in the 1260s at just the 16 sites that we documented with tree ring samples was between about 45 to 73 separate habitation units that were built or remodeled in just the 1260s. And if we use Maxon and his colleagues' estimate that the average family unit size at this point was about 5 individuals throughout the 1200s, then we can propose that there's a reasonable but still conservative estimate, at least 225 to 365 occupants in just this area during this decade. Again, and this is again just from the sites that we visited and were able to work at and take tree ring samples. So given the frequency of late dates and the likelihood that contemporary sites existed in the immediate area, particularly on the eastern side of Cedar Mesa, we suspect that the population in the 1250s through the 1270s was much higher than previously proposed. And instead of a small holdout population confined to Moon House and just a few other sites, we propose that a substantial population remained in the area until the early to mid 1270s. Now, these results really changed the view of the population in the Cedar Mesa area dramatically, and there are likely many more of these sites that date to this within these same decades, just haven't been documented, or which we weren't able to take tree ring samples. Now, in addition, the mural data that I collected as part of the Cedar Mesa Building Murals project is another method to identify sites dating after 1250. So based on the tree ring dates and structures with plaster decorations that I documented throughout my project, I determined that there's a style of painted bichrome mural shown here at the bottom of the screen that developed in the late 1240s and then continued to be used until the final depopulation of the Cedar Mesa area in the early to mid 1270s. Now, this style of painted mural was mainly created inside kivas, but also in gallery spaces on the exterior of walls, above rooms, particularly special buildings, including the new construction at 5 dated sites in the 1260s. Including that, there's, I think it was 52 additional sites that had examples of these building murals, even though we weren't able to tree ring date all of them. Now, this style of murals made a combination of using either red with either white, yellow, or green bichrome designs, often depicting landscape scenes and landscape-based elements, often with some type of cotton textile-based motifs woven or integrated into those, as you can see in the center and the right here. And these data show that this mural style developed in structures 10 to 20 years earlier in the Cedar Mesa area than in the rest of the region. So when we don't have available tree ring data here, or we don't necessarily need to go sample every particular site, where we can identify these bichrome murals, we can say, okay, this is a style that only occurs after about 1250 and into the 1270s. And so then we can extrapolate and say that these sites also were occupied in this late time period. So based on this research, and including the 9 dated sites that we just talked about, with both painted murals and tree ring dates, identified a total of 61 murals that were painted mostly inside kivas and habitation rooms. And these likely represented individual family units at a total of 46 sites distributed across Cedar Mesa area and occupied in the 1250s. So excluding the 5 structures already discussed, this adds an additional 280 people at least to the post-1250s picture, if we assume that just one family lived at each site with the bichrome mural. So that being said, my sample of painted murals was limited by access, preservation, and the presence of datable wood. So there are likely many more sites with painted decorations in the area that we speak to this much larger but unrealized later occupied spaces. So in the Cedar Mesa area, these settlements were more widely dispersed than you might see at Mesa Verde or in Seguin Canyon, and compared to other large settlements. But they formed integrated communities still, even though they're more widespread. They weren't concentrated like at Cliff Palace. They were maybe spread across a mile or so, but they still constitute the same type of large community that was integrated. And so we see this, like I said, this is the tip of the iceberg here. So if we add those sites, as you can see here in blue, we can see that this really changes the landscape of what the latest decades of the ancestral Pueblo occupation in this area looked like. So while these sites, the late sites we documented and dated are distributed across the landscape, the majority are really concentrated in very certain settings, very particular settings, especially on the eastern side of Cedar Mesa. So prior studies have demonstrated that farming conditions were relatively marginal and the climate drier in the Cedar Mesa area than, say, to the east in the McElmo and Central Mesa Verde areas between about 1250 and 1275. And then actually that was a really bad downturn in the climate, in particular in the Cedar Mesa area. It shouldn't surprise us then that folks really concentrated their settlements in very particular settings. For one, folks often would situate their habitations near large patches of deep soil, particularly on mesa top settings where dryland and runoff would have been possible. They also put their habitations near persistent springs and seeps just below the canyon rims and then bottoms of deep canyons. And then they also built them in easily defendable settings in high canyon shelves, and alcoves, and other places that were hard to access. And often when we see these sites, they're either situated along narrow ledges. There's access through a series of hand and toe holds, sometimes a series of ladders, some of which have been brought up. And in one case, we even documented a wooden bridge across a chasm. And I'm not actually very fond of heights, so it was really nerve-wracking to get to some of these places. So while these late sites are really hard to access, and they seem to be situated in defensive places, probably where one could, or where families could hide away from maybe short-term raids coming through. So even though they were situated in these hard to reach settings, people weren't hiding. And we know that because in this late time period, post 1250, they would often depict these large painted shields up above their habitations, as you can see at this site here in Cedar Mesa. And so it's kind of like, oh, we're hiding away from folks, but then we're going to put this big billboard up above our site. And what Holly Shastama suggested is that these are situated basically to advertise that these sites are potentially well defendable, that people had the means and the resources to defend these places against short-term raiders. They could hold up for a while and basically wait for folks to take off and then go back and live their lives. But that being said, these places are really difficult to get to. So imagine, the really humanistic side of this. How would you keep your children and your elderly from falling off the cliff? How would they get to the site on a regular basis? How would you get resources like water and food at these places? It must have been really difficult. And so those concerns, though, seem to have been outweighed by the need for defending themselves and hiding up and controlling access to the places they were living. Some of these sites, we noticed some really unusual features that hadn't been really noticed or focused on. And a couple of these are the presents you can see on the right here, what we call Hakal walls. Now, these are basically posts in adobe. So they would put these posts in the ground, build a lattice work of willows or something else, fill that in then with some brush, and then plaster one side usually, sometimes both sides, but usually one side. And this is what we call Hakal architecture. We often, or sorry, occasionally we'll also see these things we call entry boxes. This is an L-shaped entry box, so they come in a variety of shapes. And both of these are really the calling cards, or the hallmarks, if you will, of architectural constructions in the Kayenta area, so to the south in northeastern Arizona. And you can see on the left here, these are some examples of these Hakal architecture, first identified by Dean in '69 and by Lex Lindsay, showing this this entry box. And these are really, really common in architecture in the Kayenta area. Independently, Jeff Dean and I, when I was at the Laboratory of Tree and Research, compiled a data set of all the Hakal walls at Mesa Verde National Park. There's a total of 4 of them. And like I said, in the Kayenta area, this is the dominant style of architecture. In the Cedar Mesa area, it seems to be somewhat of a mix. And so there's many more Hakal walls than you see over to the east in the Central Mesa Verde area, maybe less so than you'd see in the Kayenta area. But these are made not just in a similar style, but are so closely follow the same pattern so closely that it seems they probably belong to the same community practice. So basically, they were made the same way. People were taught how to do this within a certain tradition, and that suggests that these sites may have been occupied by occupants, at least some of them, that came from the Kayenta area to the south. Here's a really good example, the inside of a granary to be documented. This is a panoramic view that shows just the incredible preservation and the construction technique used to make those tall walls. And many of these sites, we also saw abundant evidence of cotton textile production. So we find artifacts tucked in here, there, at these sites and at these alcoves, including fragments of weaving battens for weaving cotton, loom anchors, wooden awls, spindle whorls, and rods. And then this in the upper left, this artifact, it's one of my favorite things I've ever encountered, left at the site. This is a yucca leaf-tipped needle. Basically, you take the pointy end, the business end of a yucca leaf, scrape some of the fiber off the end, and then they actually spliced it with a piece of cotton, and this is used to finish cotton textiles. This, and then evidence that we have often in the structures themselves, where we have, when we can see them, evidence of loom anchors in the floors, and on the plaster layers on the side of the walls, we see depictions of sandals and cotton textiles. So it seems that these rooms were not just decorated with depictions of different types of textiles, but they actually were probably cotton and other weaving production areas as well. And this is an example in the lower right here of the type of loom, this upright loom that was probably erected within this space. And so this really shows us that the Cedar Mesa area, especially in the latest decades of occupation, was the place where there was this mixing, this kind of hybridity of Mesa Verde and Kayenta identities. So we have from the Kayenta area.
All right, we seem to have been a little frozen there. Ben, you with us? Oh.
Yeah, when did you lose me?
No, just for a second, you're fine. You just froze up for a moment.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought our service was great. Anyway, so, but yeah, so we have two on white wares and gray wares, again, coming in small but consistent frequencies from the Kayenta area. But then we also have evidence of Mesa Verde connections. So we have McElmo style masonry, T-shaped doors, Mesa Verde style towers, cribbed roof kivas with pilasters, Mesa Verde ceramic traditions, so white wares, red wares, gray wares, and then large canyon head sites, which are really very unusual in the Kent area, but are very, very common in the Central Mesa Verde area. So this is the time period. There's this really interesting mixing that's occurring in the Cedar Mesa area. Another really interesting thing we noticed is that examples we see from the Central Mesa Verde area, these bichrome murals that were made in the very last decades of occupation sometimes function as calendars. So the most well-known example in the Four Corners area, it comes from the third story of the Cliff Palace's four-story tower here. This is this red and white mural that scholars have suggested functioned as an astronomical calendar. Well, on the right here, you can see an example from Cedar Mesa where we documented this bichrome mural here, and it actually functions as a winter solstice marker. So at winter solstice, this roof beam that's sticking out right here will actually cast a shadow that right at noon, right at midday, for a couple days right around the winter solstice, will actually pierce the center of this this concentric set of circles here. And we think that these are both showing targets, shields, but then also probably are related to astronomical bodies like the sun or moon. So like we see in the Central Mesa Verde area, in the Cedar Mesa area, these bichrome murals, often situated in multi-story architecture or perched alcoves, would function as calendar devices. Here's just a better picture of that right there. So at the start of the depopulation, basically after the 1240s into the 1280s, we see this shared mural tradition across the region. And based on our tree ring data, it looks like in the Cedar Mesa area over here on the left, this tradition may have been 10 to 20 or maybe even more years earlier than we see in other parts of the region. We can see examples of these bichrome murals here from Cedar Mesa. Even Canyon de Chelly has a few. The Central Mesa Verde area, the Middle San Juan from Solomon and Aztec, they appear. And even the Gallina area, way over in New Mexico, far to the west, uses the same type of decoration, although in slightly different configurations at roughly the same time. So again, when we see examples of these, it adds to the tree ring data and shows us that basically there's a much, much larger occupation in the Cedar Mesa area than had previously been proposed. So this is all this data combined. So on the left, again, you can see the prior studies, and then on the right here, the yellow dots showing sites with 1250s 1250s dates and construction, the red 1260s constructions, and then the blue are the sites with the bichrome murals that post-date to the late 1240s and into the 1280s. A better view of that. After that time period, basically after the mid-1270s, it does look like most people probably had taken off out of Cedar Mesa. And it does seem like our data supports prior research by Darla Glowacki that the depopulation probably occurred at the family scale, not at the village scale. So it doesn't seem like whole villages probably picked up and left all at once, but that individual families may have picked up and left piecemeal, and that over time, basically over the course of between 1250, 1260s into the 1270s, basically all those folks left. Now, prior research has suggested that most of these folks probably went to the Central Mesa Verde area to the east and joined populations both in the Cortez area, but then also Mesa Verde National Park, where you see these really large cliff dwellings. You see Cliff Palace and the big canyon head oriented sites like Sand Canyon, where you have hundreds and hundreds of rooms. And each one of these kivas probably representing one household or so. But at the same time, based on these strong connections with the Kayenta area to the south, we suggest that there was these existing ties to northeastern Arizona, and that probably a lot of people from the Cedar Mesa area probably left and went to the south to join those folks that they already had some affinity to. We think that a lot of those folks probably went to Keat Seal. You can see an example here on this plan map of Keat Seal and what it probably looked like at about 1260, or sorry, 1286. And you can see it was a very large population. Now, when people leave the Cedar Mesa area, if they all went to the Central Mesa Verde area to the east, we would think that they would probably bring some of those other traditions with them, especially the tall architecture. But like I said, from the existing data that we have from Mesa Verde National Park, which is extensive, the folks at the NPS have done an incredible job over the last 100 and some years documenting all of these sites. There's a total of 4 or 5 Pakal walls at that entire park. So if large components of this population, Cedar Mesa, moved to Mesa Verde National Park, we would expect they'd probably bring some of those Pakal traditions with them if they're permitted, and we just don't see that. So that again suggests that there's probably other places where these folks are going as well, particularly to the south. Now, in the this 40th anniversary volume, there's some other great chapters. Well, they're all really great chapters, but there's a couple in particular by Lee Kwamasima and Stuart Gemtua, where they talk about Hopi connections to the Central Mesa Verde area and to the Bears Ears area as well. And they suggest that, that it wasn't just people getting pushed out. Often we think as archaeologists that people are leaving an area because, like I said, they're making these defensive sites. So somebody's raiding, somebody's coming in. What Lee and Stewart suggest, there's also in the Hopi tradition at least, and probably in other Pueblo cultures as well, processes for recruitment. And so folks can actually be invited. And there's many cases throughout the oral traditions that they speak of where groups of people, ritual practitioners, folks that have certain access to certain technologies or plant varieties are actually invited into far-flung communities to bring those things to improve the lives of the people that live in those places. And so we think, they don't mention in that chapter, they don't mention building murals and Akal walls and things like that, but those are the types of features that were probably the calling cards of some of these particular clans or social groups as they moved into these other places during the height of the depopulation. I want to conclude. I'm not throwing a lot at you here, but to say that, in our chapter, we provide a new set of unequivocal evidence for the late construction activities in the canyons of the Cedar Mesa between 1250 and 1270 at a scale much larger than previously suggested. Now, these samples that we were able to look at come primarily from sites with defensive attributes, including difficult to access locations along cliff edges and around and on top of pinnacles and outcrops. And some sites also have architectural barriers inhibiting direct access to different parts of the site. Our data indicate that a population of several hundred people, if not on the scale of 1 to 2,000, remained in the area during the 1260s. While relatively small compared to other sites in the area, these populations formed dispersed communities that shared important connections, expressed through settlement locations, architecture, building murals, and rock art. Now, new communities were built near access to permanent springs and precarious settings, and the placement of sites in defensive settings that contained large shield imagery, in particular, beginning in the mid to late 1240s and 1250s, indicates that potential warfare and inter-village strife were pressing issues for the groups who remained in the area. Now, the impetus for shifting settlements to canyon head settings in the mid-1200s may have begun in response to increased threat of violence, either from outside forces or from local communities, inter-village strife. But groups did seem to move away to avoid these conditions, and the remaining population took refuge in precarious places. So given the contemporaneity, we propose that the social strife was related to similar types of increased violence that we see and other types of conflict that was been documented by Crow Canyon researchers in the East. So places like Castle Rock and Sand Canyon, that we know went through some pretty hard times in the last couple of months of their occupation in the late 1200s. And then also in the Middle San Juan. We have similar examples from Solomon and Aztec, where there does seem to be some pretty clear evidence of violence and strife in the very, very late 1200s. So, while most of the, or at least some of the groups in the Cedar Mesa area may have left entirely and moved to areas to much further to the south to join groups in the Kayenta area, we think that probably a large proportion did move to the east to join folks in the Central Mesa Verde area, at least for a short time, especially in Mesa Verde National, what is now Mesa Verde National Park, and then eventually moved out to join groups that were already living in places like Hopi, Acoma Laguna, Zuni, and along the Rio Grande. But I think it is really important to remember that folks probably also went to the south. Here's a great example in this picture. Here we can see this really interesting hybridity, this mix of these architectural and social traditions. So on the back wall, we have a T-shaped door with Nicamo style masonry. And this wall here is what's left of a Hakal wall with one of those L-shaped entry boxes, kind of the hallmark of the Kayenta area. And they're situated, this site's situated right on this really precipitous cliff. And this is just one, like I said, of hundreds of examples of this. And so this seems to be the pattern. So in conclusion, the tree ring dates that we present in this chapter really add to the enormous body of dendrochronological data from the northern Southwest, previously compiled by Crow Canyon Research and a host of others, of course. So while our contribution is relatively small in terms of just the raw numbers of new dates that we were able to generate over the years, these data come from a critical area within the larger region, and one that's distinguished by some of the best preservation and some of the most remarkable examples of ancient Pueblo material culture. So as such, these data provide valuable new insights into the Cedar Mesa area and the larger region. And this is just one example of why we should continue to revisit and augment the tree ring record in order to refine existing tree ring chronologies and cultural histories that we might gain more in-depth understanding of regional depopulation processes at the end of the 13th century. Thank you.
Love the Ricardo Cate drawing always. You have that framed on your wall, right?
I do. Well, I haven't put it back up yet, but I do. But yeah, so I should say, I want to make sure we have a whole lot of folks, too many to really name individually, to thank everybody from our federal partners at the BLM, the Forest Service, the National Park Service, to volunteers, friends groups. Crow Canyon, of course, was very, very supportive of this in many different aspects. And then also the School of Anthropology, the Tree Ring Lab, and Arizona State Museum, amongst many, many other folks. And like I said, Tom and I both had, I know I had at least 45 volunteers, and I'm sure he had many more than that. And so, none of this occurs in a bubble. We don't, Tom and I can't do all this work on our own, and so we rely on interested and ethical and supportive folks to come and help us do this. So I really want to give a shout out to those folks.
Awesome, thank you. So I did put in the chat, since we're over time and people are dropping off, but go ahead and email me if you want to more further correspondence on the questions. And Ben, I'm going to ask you one question that was asked multiple times about tree ring methodology. AI algorithms. Are we going to get to the point where tree rings are a barcode?
Oh my gosh, Liz.
I know you
I get asked this a lot. No, that's a really good question. And I want to say it's going to happen. Eventually it'll happen. There's been a lot of, well, that's a really complex thing, of course, but trees grow in really strange ways, and preservation affects them as well, especially samples that are 1,000 years old or near that, or older. So it's not as cut and dry as just sanding off a beam and scanning it like you would at the grocery store and it spits out a date, because trees can put on false rings, they can have missing rings, they can grow in weird ways. They're kind of like, I really relate them to people. People do strange things, right? Trees do even stranger things. And then there's different species and they all do different things. And then depending on the climate and where the tree came from and the preservation conditions. So yes, we will get there, but I think we're a ways off still. There are some really interesting programs, this one called Coup Recorder, that you can actually basically do a flatbed scanner of a big tree sample. You tell it where a couple of ring boundaries are, and then it'll generate a date. Now that's only been tested on a very few species from very select places in the world. And so there's a long way to go to get it to where we can do that. So I am hopeful. And what I always tell people is, man, you get 10 of the top experts together. Let's get together, give us 5 years and $10 million, and we'll get that for you. So I say hopefully, and I look forward to that, but we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, you have explained this to me back in the lab at Crow Canyon, and one of the things that really struck me was when looking through the microscope at all of the convolutions, and when you teach people how to do that with the pictures like you had earlier in the presentation, it looks like, oh, this is so easy and neat and these little flat things, which is really misleading. I was persuaded after you showed it to me. And all of our listeners, if you want to come to Crow Canyon, we can still show you what that looks like under a microscope, and that might be a fun webinar sometime in and of itself, to kind of show the images and the trees and all, and how complicated it is. So
it would be great. Yeah. No, exactly. It seems misleading when I give you this highly oversimplified figure to look at. But it's a science, I mean, people have put, hundreds of scientists, thousands really, have put thousands and millions of hours into doing this. So, it's not something you can just pick up and be like, oh, I'll hold it up to the light and be like, oh, this is 1268. I think there was one guy, one of the most accomplished tree ring technicians, Dick Warren, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. He was one guy that I think probably could do that. He'd looked at many thousands of samples. He could probably pick it up and be like, well, this, it was 2:30 on a Wednesday back in 865. But other than that, it's I don't think anybody else could probably do that other than Dick Warren. And if he was around to say, he'd probably say, no, I can't do that.
All right, I'm just since people are hanging out a little bit, one other question, which is a fun one, is how did you guys get into some of these sites?
Well, that's a good question. So this Ricardo Cate drawing that Ricardo made for me when I gave a version of this talk years ago really shows what we do. Most of these sites are not difficult to access. Like I said, the pre-1250, most of them were built in like the bottoms of canyons. And so then it's just, if you're tough enough to hike into the canyon in the heat of the summer, which is usually when I have the time and the money to do so. But then in some of the really hard to get to places, I would employ the efforts of professional climbers. And we had special permission, I have to emphasize, to do this. It's normally against the rules. And so if you start rappelling into sites anywhere in the Four Corners, you'll get arrested. But we had special permission from our federal partners to do this. And so I would get professional climbers to help us. So one guy, for example, is Greg Child, not to be confused with Craig Child. Greg Child climbed K2 without oxygen, and he climbed Everest back in the 80s. He lives in Moab. He's an Australian expat. He's great. And so he is very interested in archaeology, and so I had him come and help us. So he would set up all the ropes, and then we would just rappel down. I'm proficient at all of that, but I, have things to focus on, like getting the equipment there and making sure people are getting there safely and things. So we had professional climbers help us out in the few instances where we did have to get into some of these really, really hard to get to places. But yeah, that's the way we did it. Ancient people, they were much tougher and apparently didn't have as much of a fear of heights as I do, because they would scamper along these teeny ledges or these hand toe holds or this crazy ladder across a crevasse. And I'm sure they probably didn't enjoy it, at least most of them, like I said, the old people and the young people, but they did it. And so, but many times that was just preventative for us. We just couldn't get there safely. And of course, the main rule the BLM and the federal folks told us is, 1, don't mess the sites up, and 2, don't hurt yourselves. And so, those are the key things. And so that's, sometimes we had to come through a different way. And that was really challenging. And then, there's a lot of sites out there. The goal, like I said, wasn't to go to every single site and to sample every single piece of wood. We're trying to create representative samples to, understand the bigger picture. Great professor of mine told me, you don't have to see every data point to understand the pattern. And so, these 16 sites that, these 35 sites that we have dates on now, are really probably sufficient to create a much larger proxy that we can then look at the much larger region. So we don't have to sample everything to understand that. And it gives us all these tools then we can take in all sorts of different ways. So anyway.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll let you go since we're over. And thank you, my friend. It's so great to see you, and what a spectacular presentation. So
thank you so much, Liz.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.